While I was listening to Ambassador de los Rayos' open letter to the leaders, I think he has practically covered some of the topics I will also discuss. So thank you for the introduction, Ambassador. But the topic today that was given to me, part of the topic actually is protecting the ASEAN community from evolving political security challenges. Now, about 2 weeks ago, I hosted the ADMM, the Asian Defense Ministers meeting, and the ASEAN Defense Ministers meeting plus in Clark Air Base. The first meeting was for the ASEAN, 10 ASEAN Ministers of Defense, and the second day was for the ADMM plus, 10 plus 8 Ministers of Defense. And during the discussion, and I was taking notes about some of the concerns of all countries, there is a common thread that runs through all the nations. In the ADMM, it covers climate change and natural disasters, terrorism, piracy, refugees, illegal drugs, and the South China Sea. For the ADMM Plus, the most prominent subject matter was North Korea. So let me go one by one on this very briefly, and then later on maybe propose some actions, course of action to protect the ASEAN community. For the effect of climate change, I think we are also familiar with the effects of climate change or the changing patterns of weather that causes havoc in our country. Yolanda is one of the recent example of a super typhoon, and we are learning a lot in facing this problem with the help of our neighbors. Now there is also a looming problem on climate change, which is involves the 5 Mekong countries. Although it does not affect the Philippines, it affects half of the ASEAN: Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam. Experts are saying that the Himalayan plateau, which holds a lot of ice, is slowly melting, and that is where the Mekong River gets most of its water. Add the fact that China has been building dams upstream, and also some of the countries downstream also building dams, and you have the making of a great disasters in the future. On terrorism, Marawi actually is an eye-opener for all of us. Marawi showed us, the Defense Department, how woefully inadequate our capabilities is to face this kind of problem. Although we have been warned beforehand that terrorism is already in the country. For the longest time, I think the IFP had been in denial mode that they are not yet here until Marawi broke out. But we are thankful for the assistance that were given to us by our friends, the different countries that came to help. I think the first that was there was actually the United States with their technical assistance. Australia also came on board, then China, and lately Russia. Malaysia and Indonesia actually were the first minister that came here to ask me if any help that we need was the Indonesian Defense Minister Riakodo. A week later, Minister Yasamuddin came, and then sometime later, the Defense Minister of Singapore came also to offer this help, and they are very thankful for that. So for the terrorism, I think what we have been doing in the past, actually past years, when we know that the ISIS in the Middle East were actually directing their fighters to go home to where they come from and establish cells. We have fighters in the Middle East who are from Malaysia, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, and to a certain extent also Singapore. And we are actually in contact with some of the countries fighting the ISIS in the Middle East, and they have been giving us some names of these fighters who are there, and we are very anxious to find out if they find their way back home. On piracy in the southern borders of the Philippines, these have been some of the problems that have been bedeviling us in the past: kidnappings in the high seas, hostages that were brought to Hulu, and we have seen some of the decapitations that they have done to these hostages. So on piracy, what we did was to craft a trilateral maritime and air patrol with Indonesia and Malaysia. The maritime patrol was launched last June, and the air patrol was launched last month, and they are working very well. We are happy to report that for the past 6 months there have not been any piracy in that part of the Philippines, the tri-boundaries of the three countries. Now, refugees, this came out actually when during the ADMM, when Malaysia, I mentioned this in his remark, the Malaysian Defense Minister. This pertains to the Rohingyas that were leaving, actually, being driven away. Some say they're being driven away by Myanmar from the Rakhine region of Myanmar. And a lot of these Rohingyas, Rakhine residents, are finding their way in Bangladesh. I think about 400,000 of them there now. 200,000 in northern Malaysia and peninsular Malaysia. Some have found their way also in Thailand, and a lot of them are in Saudi Arabia. Now this came out and it was discussed a little bit. According to the defense minister of Myanmar, they are not actually trying to drive these people away, but they are just trying to prevent the influx of other people coming from Bangladesh. Now, I had a bilateral meeting with the Myanmar defense minister, and I asked him, what are they doing to stop these refugees, because these refugees have a tendency or vulnerable for being recruited to become fighters of terrorists. And he said that there is actually a path for citizenship by the Rohingyas. Incidentally, they do not want to call them Rohingyas because to them, the Rohingya term doesn't exist in the Myanmar. It is actually, according to him, it was invented by some people there to make them separate people from those coming from Bangladesh. And so he said, if these Rakhine residents are there before on the date of their independence, which is I think 1949, then they could be citizens of Myanmar. If not, then they will not become citizens. So the consensus was for Myanmar to do more to resolve these issues, because ASEAN says that the concern of ASEAN is that these refugees might find a way into some terrorist camps, be trained, and then infiltrate the other countries in the region, and it will become a problem. For illegal drugs, I think everybody is affected by illegal drugs, more so here in the Philippines. Indonesia has more users on the Philippines, and they are having some problems there. What we have agreed to do was to exchange notes, the transfer of precursors, the material that will be made into shabu or methamphetamine. And so there is actually an exchange of intelligence information about drug-related incidents between the countries in the ASEAN. South China Sea. The South China Sea is actually a little bit more complicated. As of this moment, there is modus vivendi in that part of the region. It affects actually some ASEAN members from the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Brunei. And the Department of Foreign Affairs is working on a code of conduct for the South China Sea with the Chinese government. And also they are crafting a code of conduct for unplanned encounters in the sea. Now, I welcome this development because we want peace in that part of the region, and I'm hoping that the framework will be approved soon by both countries. Now, North Korea. I think this is one of the flashpoint or the powder keg actually in this region. Let's look at the dynamics in North Korea actually. In North Korea. Now, North Korea has ceased to become a non-proliferation problem because they have already the bomb. They have already some warheads, nuclear warheads that they can use anytime. They are slowly improving their ballistic missile capabilities, and it is creating a lot of tension and nervousness in the region, especially the neighboring countries like Japan and South Korea, and to a certain extent, China. Now, the rhetoric that's been going on in the countries that are involved in North Korea. Of course, I cannot discount the US, China, Japan, and South Korea. The rhetoric that's going on in the US actually is a little mixed. While Secretary Tillerson is advocating for a moderate approach, sometimes the bellicose statement of President Trump is not helping when he says that when the statement says that the military option is off the table, then it also sends a signal to the North Korean, and the North Korea becomes nervous. Now, China is a big factor in the North Korean issue. I was talking to the Chinese ambassador a couple of days back, and I asked him point blank if why can't you not control North Korea, and he told me nobody can control North Korea because it is acting on its own. So I added, why can't you cut off your oil supply to North Korea? He said, if we do that, then we create more problem. He said that if we cut off the oil and there will be chaos inside because there will be hardship for the people, Mr. Kim Jong-un will be more frantic and desperate, and he might do something drastic, like firing his nuclear weapons. And he said, we do not want a failed state in the North Korea. Because if North Korea fails as a state, then there will be millions of refugees coming, crossing the border toward China, and we do not want that to happen. And so, some cooler minds have been prevailing lately to talk. I think the South Korean new president is having an approach to this a little bit more cooler heads. So that's where we are. We are just bystander here watching what's happening there in North Korean Peninsula or in the Korean Peninsula. We have 26,000 Filipino nationals working in South Korea, and that would become a big problem on how to evacuate them if something happens in North Korea, between the North and the South. Now, we are only focusing our sight on the nuclear capability of North Korea, but we have not factored in the thousands of artillery that is aimed in Seoul, just at the demilitarized zone, that could actually obliterate Seoul in a matter of hours if they fired simultaneously. So that is the problem. So resolving disputes. Even while we try to cooperate to tackle our common non-traditional security challenges, there will be disputes and misunderstanding from time to time. And I'm actually referring to one of the most serious issues that affects us, the South China Sea. We therefore need to strengthen strategic trust among our political, diplomatic, and military leaders. One way for this is for ASEAN and China to come to an agreement on the code of conduct for the South China Sea and a code of conduct for unplanned encounters in the sea. As I said a while ago, I welcome this endorsement by Southeast Asia foreign ministers of the framework for code of conduct in the South China Sea. The COC is meant to prevent conflicting territorial claims in the South China Sea from erupting into violent confrontations. Now, lately there's been quite a standoff in the Pag-asa Island about a couple of months back. Now, the Pag-asa Island, which we occupy, is actually just about 14 nautical miles away from Subi Reef, which is already a built-up reclaimed facility by China. And just off Pag-asa, there were 3 sandbars that appeared from nowhere. They just appeared. We do not know how or why they appeared, but suddenly our troops said that there were sandbars there. We tried to put some structures in one of the sandbars near our island, and the Chinese reacted. And so the president came to know about this, and they said, let's pull out. But anyway, the Chinese said that they are not going to occupy any new features in this practice or in the South China Sea. And I think the foreign minister also agreed to do that. So we left, and the dispute was, the tension was lowered again. But after that, somebody proposed, I think from our side and their side, the Chinese, to come up with a protocol so that the ground commanders on the ground can resolve disputes immediately without bringing the issue towards the higher ups, like to me and to the president. And the Chinese are amenable to that, and we will do that in the near future, because I foresee that there could be some incidents, like the presence of their coast guards, their fishermen who are actually militias of the Coast Guard and the PLA Navy, to be have encounters with our fishermen as well as our Coast Guard. I am hoping that the framework, which has been started already, the COC, will be approved sometime soon before the end of the year ends. And we hope that the goodwill amongst ASEAN countries and China will bring about a binding agreement, even a gentleman's agreement, on the code of conduct. I say a gentleman's agreement because a piece of paper is not enforceable if parties do not honor their promises. As Ambassador Rosario said a while ago, I think nothing would happen in this if we do not follow a rules-based protocol in this region. In addition, it's my hope and prayer that the code of conduct for unplanned encounters at the seas will also include Coast Guard ships as well as other maritime vessels, and not just our navies. The risk of conflict from our Coast Guard and paramilitary vessels can be discounted, and therefore we have to work together to manage the risk. On the matter of joint exploration in the South China Sea, West Philippine Sea, we welcome joint exploration with everyone. The challenge is how to move forward and find a mutually acceptable agreement that is acceptable to all. In the case of the Philippines, we want an agreement that does not violate our constitution and sovereignty. What we can do together? There are many other things we can do together. First, we have to expand and deepen military-to-military exchange and cooperation with both the US and China. We have already welcomed the PLA Navy to our ports, as we have welcomed the navies from the US, Russia, Japan, India, and other countries. And we will warmly welcome them again in the future. Second, we need to strengthen the ASEAN Defense Ministers meeting and the ADMM Plus to enable regional countries to cooperate in addressing the various security challenges I have previously identified. We would welcome more military-to-military dialogue with China. We have been sending our officers to China for short visits, and we will do more in the future. By the way, the ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting Plus will be henceforth annually. Before this year, it was every other year. So we agreed, the ADMM agreed to ramp it up a little bit so that the ADMM Plus ministers could join us every year. Third, we should ensure that the ASEAN Regional Forum, which brings together the ASEAN, China, the US, Russia, Japan, and the two Koreas, would remain relevant. The ASEAN Regional Forum, ARF, actually is the only forum that North Korea attends. And so this is the only place that we could engage them in a dialogue. We hope that the ASEAN Regional Forum can play a constructive role, an honest broker in bringing the US, China, and North Korea back to the table. What happens in Northeast Asia is important to us here in Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia have significant trade ties with Japan and South Korea, and any conflict there would also affect us here in this region. Finally, to build understanding more key stakeholders in the region, we need to understand the security and economic interests of China and the United States. I think the dynamics of the two superpowers is evolving every minute, and I think we could also influence the two if the ASEAN could engage them bilaterally or trilaterally. China wants peaceful development, freedom of navigation in the South China Sea, and friendly relations with its neighbors. It deserves to be respected as a great power. We sincerely welcome the assurance of President Xi Jinping that China will remain a peaceful country no matter how powerful it becomes in the future. The US also wants freedom of navigation and to ensure that its legitimate security interests in the region are safeguarded. The Philippines will remain a reliable friend of the United States, not only friend but ally actually. The bonds of our people are too strong to break. As for us in the Philippines, and I think I can say this for our ASEAN friends as well, we want peace and economic development, as again said by the good ambassador a while ago. Respect for our territorial integrity and rules-based global and regional order. And we also want friendly relations with both the US and China. We are friends to all, enemies to none. If I may suggest, we in the ASEAN therefore should establish a strategic think tank that will focus solely on the ASEAN, US, and China relations. As I said, we have a number of common interests to work on. We in the ASEAN have to constantly engage our friends in China and the US so that they can better understand our interests. We want to hear and see the assurances, not only for today, but more importantly, in the future. This is one way to strengthen ASEAN leadership. We will therefore develop track 2 dialogues. The more we meet face to face and try to understand each other's interests and how we can work together, the better for all of us in the future. We should start with the next generation of young leaders in our countries. I hope that in the future, the stat-based ADR can also invite our friends from China and ASEAN to these dialogues. Conclusion, Professor Mabubani loves to narrate the analogy of the two elephants. He said that if the elephants fight, the grass suffer. If they make love, the grass also suffer. Yeah. So we are talking about two great countries here, China and the US. If the China and the US can cooperatively work together on the problem with North Korea, which they are, I think, doing hard, trying to hard their best to resolve, then I am hopeful that they can also work together that whatever issues come their way, particularly those in the South China Sea. A spiral of trust is the best outcome for all. On the other hand, if major powers have fundamental disagreements, I hope we will remember that it is in the best interest to preserve ASEAN and not to divide, and use it as a proxy for the rivalry. In my remarks at the Fullerton Dialogue last year, or early this year, I think one of my comments was that we should not use ASEAN as a proxy for the rivalry. We in ASEAN, in turn, should learn how to dance with the elephants. Thank you, and mabuhay kayong lahat.